Welcome to the Real Assets, Real Leaders podcast, a show where we meet with leaders from across the energy, infrastructure and real asset space to talk through their careers, their motivation and their leadership ethos. My name is Joshua Fowkes, founder of Sondra Metric Executive Search. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Real Assets, Real Leaders podcast. It's great that you can join us again this week for another episode. And we have the pleasure of being joined by Richard Burrell. So Richard, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you being here.
Lovely to be here, and good morning to you.
Yeah, great. So Richard, lots of people listen to this will be really interested to dive into your career and to hear about the things that you've been involved in. Would you mind just starting off by giving us a short introduction to who you are and maybe the work that you're currently doing as well?
Sure. Well, obviously, I'm Richard Burrell. I have two current roles that I'm involved in. I'm executive chairman of Bring Energy, and I'm non-executive chairman of Ceras. I'll tell you a little bit about both. Bring Energy is the UK's largest provider of heating and cooling networks across all the major cities in the UK. So we have heat networks ranging from Edinburgh, Newcastle, Birmingham, Coventry, Leicester. Down here in London, we do the whole of the Olympic Park, all of Battersea Power Station and Nine Elms by the American Embassy, Southampton. And what we do is we basically provide via a heat network heating and cooling to a load of buildings who are on that network. And it is probably the best way to decarbonise large cities. And we are looking at the moment to expand our capabilities, expand our growth into new cities, and indeed extend the reach of the pipes that we have in our existing assets. So that business was acquired by Swiss Life and Schroeder Greencoat on the 1st of January 2024. I became executive chairman at that point. When we bought the business from Equans, we did not buy any central services. So for the first year of basically the whole of last year, I spent a lot of time building all of the things that would support a business. So new finance, new legal, new marketing, new IT, all of the central services to support what is actually a great business with a lot of assets and really dedicated people at running energy centres supporting those assets. At the same time, I'm also non-executive chairman of Ceras, which was a business bought by Pioneer Point Partners around the same time as the Bring deal. Ceras was formerly called Eskin Renewables, and prior to that was called Stobart Biomass. So it's had three name changes in a number of years. Ceras provides waste wood and biomass to a number of the major biomass power stations across the UK. So it's a logistics business of gathering in waste, processing waste, and then providing it to the power stations to give them fuel to generate electricity. Again, that is a business with significant growth opportunities. It will grow not only in serving more biomass power stations, but also, I think, increasingly into things like sustainable aviation fuel and marine fuels. So two very exciting businesses. I have the honour of chairing both, and I see a lot of different opportunities in each organisation.
Yeah, and obviously doing both of those things, your diary must be very busy. So I imagine you have a lot going on with that. I wanted to maybe just zone in a bit more on Bring Energy and just ask you a bit more about the heat network space. So there's a lot of traction which is being gained. There's more regulation coming in to the industry, and a lot of people are forecasting significant levels of growth. Maybe not everyone who listens to this podcast will currently be aware of the opportunity that there is in the heat network space. I wonder if you could maybe just talk a bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, obviously, decarbonising heat is one of the big challenges of reaching net zero. And decarbonising heat in large cities and major towns and cities is a huge challenge. And the most effective way to do that, in most people's opinion, if you can think of a large block of flats, you can't, with a large block of flats, say with 100 flats in it, you can't have 100 different heat pumps. It would be very difficult. So doing it via a heat network and having a single energy center that is that has a single heat pump, or in a number of areas, and for instance in Coventry, we take heat from the energy from waste plant on the edge of Coventry. So all the waste that's produced in Coventry and the surrounding area goes into the energy from waste plant. That obviously produces heat, and we take it along a big pipe into the middle of Coventry called the heat line, and that pipe heats central buildings in central Coventry who are on that heat. So you can do it either with waste heat, and think of all the waste heat here in London down in the tube lines and on the River Thames and the like, or you can build your own energy centres, which you could use a large industrial scale heat pump, as we do at Stratford at the Olympic Park. So that's the real opportunity with heat networks. It's a very effective way to decarbonize large cities.
And Bring Energy, you mentioned the largest owner operator. Based on the growth projections that I've heard from various people in the industry, I imagine that you aren't going to stay static. You're not going to just have the assets that you currently have. There's a lot of opportunity to look at building and owning and operating more assets. Is that something within your kind of view?
Absolutely. I mean, my remit was to separate the business from Equans, who was the seller of the business, build up all of the central teams and resources that we would need to support a business that we could then really grow. And if you look at a lot of the local authorities, and you look at their plans to decarbonise the big cities and the big metro mayors' plans to decarbonise big urban areas, heat networks is really the only option to do it at scale. And so we see a lot of new tenders coming out over the next few years to tender through government procurement, large networks, as we saw two being tendered last year, and we'll see many more coming out over the years ahead. So we see here in the UK a very significant growth opportunity. We've got a big opportunity. Obviously, if you look at Europe and some of the Nordic countries in particular, they are very established with heat networks. So we are only at the tip of the iceberg here in the UK, and that's where I see growth as being very, very exciting. And there's a lot of institutional and infrastructure money piling into this sector because people want a part of it, and they want to finance these very long-term assets that can achieve all of the decarbonisation goals that we all want to happen.
Yeah, and you definitely do notice that increased level of investment with the different names who are popping up in the sectors and backing operators within the industry.
Sure, it makes tenders very competitive.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine.
You have to be in our position, because we are fortunate that we have networks in a lot of the major cities of the UK. So we need to be selective at which ones we go for and how we can further invest in the assets that we've got.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously with such significant levels of growth, I guess the people question comes to the forefront quite quickly, because I guess the sector is as big as it is at the moment, but with such big growth opportunities, we need more people. You need more people to come in to train in specific areas and to help the industry grow. How do you see that? I guess that gap being filled by companies like Bring Energy, where you need the experienced workforce. There's a bit of a lack at the moment. What are the different things a business like Bring Energy can do in order to kind of bolster your ranks?
One of the things that people really need to understand with heat networks is that obviously when you're looking to put pipes in the ground and dig up cities, apart from the disruption on the roads, you need a local workforce. And it's one of the things I'm saying increasingly within government at the moment. jobs in heat networks cannot be offshored. So we can't have a call center in India digging pipes in Coventry. These are local jobs for local people. And that absolutely plays to the new government's growth ambitions and the ability to get more people back to work. We're very into scaling and training young people with apprenticeships and the like. And we're very supportive of all of that because there is a lot to do. But we can do it in every major city, and these are local jobs, and that's what I think is particularly beneficial about the heat networks industry.
Yeah, and you mentioned there aligning with local government and national government objectives, and I know that Bring Energy as a business and you as well, Richard, are quite involved in working closely with the government to actually think, well, how do regulations be put in place in order to practically make sense to allow the industry to grow? Is that something that you're quite passionate at, that engagement with the government?
Absolutely. And firstly, I welcome Ofgem regulating the heat networks industry, which is started to happen this year. And we absolutely fully support that, and will be Ofgem ready before well before the end of the year. In terms of discussing with the government how we can grow heat networks, if I'm honest with you, when I came into this sector, I was surprised at the relatively little engagement that the new government had with the heat network sector as a whole. And a number of us in the sector, a number of our competitors and other firms, I think, recognise that. And we are putting steps in place at the moment to really raise our game and really help a lot of the new members of parliament and the new members of the government understand the benefits of heat networks, which is it's all about growth. It's all about being able to invest in our cities, and most importantly, it's an essential part of the decarbonisation game.
And one of the really interesting things from kind of an outsider perspective, which has been really nice to see, you mentioned there, is that level of collaboration between, I guess, what you might call competitors, but actually recognising that there's a broader societal need here to get this right from the start so that the infrastructure can be built. And I think a lot of industries, maybe you wouldn't have that kind of engagement with people who might traditionally be vying for the same type of projects. But it's quite refreshing to see that you've been involved in those kind of
so I mean, I'm a great believer. I mean, obviously, healthy competition is really important. It drives down the cost of capital. It drives a lot of good things. So I'm absolutely all for healthy competition. But actually getting to know who your competitors are and understanding how they operate, you can learn and do things better yourselves, and you can help adjust. So in every industry I've ever been involved in, I'm a great believer in sort of knowing the 5 or 6 other leaders of the competitor businesses and having a dialogue with them, because you never know when you might be able to collaborate, when you might meet them in as an opposite number on a tender, or or whether there's a particular challenge that needs to be presented in a unified way to government. So I'm a big believer in that, and I think it will certainly help to elevate the heat networks industry into the, effectively we call it a seat at the table, a seat at the government table, for them to see the benefits.
Yeah, and it's obviously between your role with Bring Energy, you work with Ceres, and also your previous roles, which we're going to kind of go into in a minute. You're very, very involved in the decarbonisation space and have been for some years. But what I wanted to do, Richard, is to go back way further than that. So we've heard about what you're doing at the moment. I'd love to talk about how it all started and how you got to where you are now. So would you give us in your own words a bit of an overview as to how you ended up getting started and what you ended up doing to start with, and we'll talk through kind of your career and some of the big milestones.
Sure, I'll give it a go, and I'll start at the beginning.
Please.
I was educated here in the UK, and I'll never forget my housemaster at school said to me in my final year of A-levels, he said, "Burrell, you're too thick to go to university. Why don't you go into the army?" So I took his advice and went into the army. But I was injured at Sandhurst very early on with a shoulder injury and ended up at a place called Headley Court, where all the ex-Falklands veterans were there. And during that 9-month stint at Headley Court, I did an education test with the Army Education Corps. And the education colonel said to me, "Why are you not at university?" I said, "Because my housemaster at school had told me I was too thick to go to university." He said, "Well, you've scored very high on all of the major metrics. Which university would you like to go to?" And I said, "Well, I've got a lot of friends at Durham." And basically, I was given an unconditional offer into Durham, where I studied economics, did 3 years there, and came out with a 2-1 and needed a job. I had no money. I had a very good business that I'd started at university with a friend of mine, which was selling shoes. And I made more money selling shoes in city dealing rooms as a undergraduate than I ever thought I would do. So I came out of university with no debt, having made a decent amount of money selling shoes. But as a student at the time, the city was going through Big Bang, and I joined UBS and spent 10 years at UBS. I started as a bond trader, and after about 6 months, I thought I wanted to do something more cerebral and went into the corporate finance division, where for 10 years I did M&A and equity and debt capital markets for large corporates all over the world, from Asia through to Europe, and to the UK. And I met during that time some of the most impressive chief executives and finance directors that I've ever met in my career. I can think of at least 2 who I was very humbled by at how their capability to assimilate knowledge and drive businesses forward. My boss left UBS after the SBC merger. He made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I can't believe how much we were paid in those days. We certainly weren't worth it, but we were paid a lot of money. And I went to ING Bearings for 2 years with my boss. There, when I left ING Bearings, I'd made enough money to start my own business, which was always sort of my goal and objective. Yeah. Having done the shoe business at university. So at that point, I liked the idea of fund management. I liked the stability of fund management fees. And I thought, what industry should I go into? And I met some people who really helped me understand how commercial property worked. And I liked the stability of commercial property leases and the fees of fund management. And I decided to set up a business called Berrington Fund Management, which was my first business that I set up. We launched a fund called the Westbury Property Fund, which I listed on the London Stock Exchange. It was the hardest fundraising I've ever done in my life. We raised 30 million over a period of about 9 months to a year.
What made it so challenging?
We had no track record. We didn't. I had some very good property people who I'd hired to buy the original seed portfolio, but effectively going to city institutions and saying, I'm an ex-banker. I've want to set up a property fund. Please, will you give me money? Was quite a hard sell. And there were times when during that year where I thought, gosh, this is all going to crash and burn. But we got there in the end, and we raised the initial 30 million. If you can believe it, at the same time, the Bradford and Bingley Building Society gave us 45 million of senior debt. So day one, the fund had 75 million of assets, which was enough to get going. About a year later, I came across a portfolio of doctors' surgeries. And I went to the board of the Westbury Property Fund, which really comprised non-executive directors with a majority who were Guernsey residents.
Hmm.
And I said, look, I want to buy a portfolio of doctors' surgeries to put into the Westbury Property Fund. And we were told, I was told very clearly that was doctors' surgeries were not mainstream commercial property. So I said, fine, would they object if I set up a parallel fund? And they didn't. I then set up a parallel fund called the Medical Property Investment Fund. And we went out to see the investors to raise money for that. And that was the easiest fundraising I've ever done. In 9 days, we raised 145 million from about 15 institutions.
So why was that so successful so quickly compared to?
I think because they'd seen a little bit what we'd done even in a year on the Westbury Property Fund, and the story around investing in doctors' surgeries was a very powerful one. It was long-term, 21-year government leases. The story was that we would buy up old doctors' surgeries in towns, amalgamate them, and then build new primary care centres. It was a very powerful business plan, and investors backed it and supported it. And that business we grew very, very fast. And again, I had 2 jobs. I had running the Westbury Property Fund and running the Medical Property Investment Fund.
A running theme, clearly.
And I did that for a number of years. And it came to about 2007. And I was looking at the commercial property. The Westbury Property Fund then was a much bigger fund. It had grown. We'd raised more money, and it was 200 to 300 million. I can't remember the exact number. And I thought, gosh, the commercial property market in 2007 is reaching the top. And I went to our major shareholder and I said, listen, I want to sell the whole lot of the commercial property because I think it's getting very toppy. What would you like me to do with the money? Would you like me to hand it back to you? And he said, the major shareholder at the time said, no, go and find a decent business to invest in. And that was when I was introduced to the team at Eddie Stobart, the logistics business. And on one day in that year, we did the deal, and it took a long time to do. But when we announced it, the commercial property was sold, and the Westbury Property Fund became Stobart, Eddie Stobart. And it's the only time I've ever been in the Sun newspaper, driving a picture of a truck into the stock exchange, and it was a really, really good day. But it was a fantastic deal for the shareholders of the Westbury Property Fund. They got out of commercial property right at the end of 2007, just before the crash in 2008. When the crash happened, or up until that point, I honestly felt like a hero.
That's quite a foretelling, isn't it? Really, because considering everything that happened in 2008, I mean,
but hold on. You at that point you're a hero. But I was still running the Medical Property Investment Fund, which had become Assura at that time, and because one felt like a hero, and this is where a very important lesson to people. Not only were we doing doctors' surgeries in Assura at the time, we were also had started a pharmacy business and had built 30-odd pharmacies attached to our doctors' surgeries. I also thought at that point we could run the whole NHS, so we were bidding for NHS services.
Wow.
Come 2008, 2009, everything went pear-shaped, and I went from hero to zero because everyone loved the property in Assura, but we were overcommitted to the pharmacies and to running NHS services. And I had to sell the NHS services business to Virgin, which I did. And it was a very painful process. And having founded this business, having done an amazing deal with Westbury, having built up an incredible portfolio of doctors' surgeries, Assura is by far now, I think, the leading owner of doctors' surgeries in the UK. It's just been bought, I think, by KKR. But in 2010, I had to resign because of the failed investment in medical services, and that was a real lesson in life. It was about building a business and slightly overstretching one's capability. And it was a really good learning for me. And I licked my wounds and thought, gosh, what am I going to do? And this is 2010. And I took the view that actually the renewables sector was where the growth was going to be, and started to have a look around at opportunities in that sector.
I hope you're enjoying this week's instalment. This podcast is brought to you by Sonderometric, an executive search firm facilitating leadership appointments across the energy, infrastructure and real asset space. If you're looking to attract top-tier leaders to drive your value creation strategy and realise your growth plans, Sonderometric's proven search strategy guarantee exceptional results, all whilst reducing the risk associated with leadership hiring. For more information, visit our website www.sonderometric.com. And I guess before we jump into, I guess what you might even consider to be kind of the next phase of your career there,
sure.
I just wanted to dig in a little bit more around that kind of Eddie Stobart acquisition, I mean, it's a brand and it's a name that is so well recognized in this country, and obviously it's been quite well established. And I guess you having that kind of, I think I mentioned before, almost like a bit of foresight there to see the property market, commercial property market was maybe nearing the peak. How did that kind of come about, and how did you feel having done, I guess, such what you could describe as an iconic deal?
Yes, I mean the reason I sold the property was that we were bidding on a new building in Birmingham, and there were 9 other bidders, fully financed bidders, who were the underbidders. And I thought, gosh, there was over £1 billion chasing one asset in Birmingham, and that's what I made the decision that property had reached its peak.
Sure.
In terms of Eddie Stobart, you don't come across a brand like that very often. William Stobart, who I got to know very well in the process, had incredible attention to detail. I remember going to the first to one of their planning offices where they plan all of the lorries, and you see the lorries on a sort of colourful map. Green, red and black. Green is full of a load, red is an empty lorry, and black is they're stopped in a place that they shouldn't be. Okay. But it was a very, very slick, well-organised business, basically moving goods and services around the UK. And I just thought that was the way forward. With the remit, go and find a decent business to operate. What happened after that, because Stobart had a few challenges in its journey as a stock market listed company. After that was not down to me. I mean, I left the board at that point, and and they had some difficulties. But the original deal of reversing Westbury into Stobart was absolutely iconic, and you saw the power. You saw the power of a really good brand.
Yeah, definitely. And then you reference selling the Assura healthcare part of the business to Virgin.
Yeah.
I think in conversation you mentioned that there's a chapter in Richard Branson's
so there's Tom Bauer who wrote a book on the biography of Richard Branson. Yes, he there is a chapter on that, and actually Tom Bauer as an author I have a lot of respect for. Having spent 3 hours with him giving him the story, he wrote it down verbatim. So if anyone wants to dig into that situation, please go and read the book, because it's I'm certainly not going to write a book about my career, but you can read about one chapter in it in that book.
But I guess from your perspective, it must be quite nice to have these such well-known kind of brands even out there in the public kind of awareness, and to have played a part and to have been involved in them. But yeah, it's also really interesting that you mentioned that it's so easy for people to talk about, these are all the great things that I've done, but actually you don't leave out this was a really hard period of time for me, and actually this was a challenge. I mean, from I guess kind of a mental perspective and a psychological perspective, how did you kind of approach regrouping after a bit of a setback?
I think I'm, one of my failings in life is I'm actually quite a sensitive person,
Mm-hmm.
and I do worry about what people say and what people say about me.
Mm.
And actually, I've learned over time to become a little bit more resilient
Mm-hmm.
on that. But it is hurtful when you've put your effort and energy into creating something, and for whatever reason you can't see it through because you've made a decision that at the time you thought was the right decision, but in hindsight it becomes becomes tricky. But my advice to anybody starting a business or getting involved in the business is have a go. There's so many people who will stand on the on the sidelines and knock what you do, but actually having a go and making things happen is what's really been driving my career. And I haven't always got it right, and I defy anybody who can say they've had a stellar career and everything has gone to plan, because actually I've learned a lot of my management skills, a lot of my way of dealing with people from the way that I've been mishandled situations or people have behaved towards me. So it's been a good learning, but I can tell you it hasn't all gone to plan. It's had its ups and downs.
That's a very important message, I think, particularly in the kind of LinkedIn influencer culture that we live in, where some people might portray life as being kind of an upward curve where you learn more and you iterate and you get better, when in reality we all know it's a lot more like this, and it can be difficult. So it's great to hear kind of your views on that. So I guess if now we can launch into that next phase of your career where really you did push into that kind of renewable energy decarbonisation space. So we left off and you'd exited Ashura. You were thinking, where's the next place to go? And then clean energy.
Well, I'll tell you, so what happened was I was speaking at a young entrepreneurs conference in 2010, one of these lunches. And I was giving my sort of views to starting a business. And somebody came up to me at the end of it and said, did I know about the renewable heat incentive? And I said, I had absolutely no idea what that was about. And I started to look into it afterwards and realized that it was a 20-year government subsidy to basically promote the decarbonisation of heat via biomass and other forms. And I thought, gosh, this is just like doctor's surgeries. It's a 20-year government obligation to stimulate an industry. And I thought, gosh, this is a great way to start a renewables business. So I started a business called Matheson Biomass, merged it very quickly with a business that Neil Eckert had created, who I'd known for a while, which was called AMP, Aggregated Micropower. And then together we created AMP Clean Energy. Neil became the executive chairman. I became the chief executive. And for that was formed in 2011, 2012. We decided to float it on the stock market in 2014. And that was, if you think about it, that was the third business that I'd done an IPO for. And, I'd always vowed after Ashura I would never get involved in another listed business, but it was a way of raising capital. We knew the institutions, we knew how it worked. And so we IPO'd AMP Clean Energy in 2014. And the business plan was really to put biomass boilers to provide heat in schools, hospitals, factories, greenhouses, large industrial greenhouses, which is what we did. And very quickly we built, through a series of acquisitions and sheer hard work and a team, the biggest biomass portfolio in the UK, providing heat to all our different customers. And we not only did the heat, we did all of the engineering and operation and maintenance of business we'd bought in Scotland. And we also did all of the fuel provision. And that's the wood pellet and the wood chip. And that really brought me back to my Stobart days,
Yeah.
because they had just also got into biomass. So that was how we linked in with that. And I worked with the A.W. Jenkinson Group up in Penrith, who were very supportive to us at AMP Clean Energy in helping us build fuel supply for our biomass plants. And then we got to about 2016 and realised that the government's enthusiasm for biomass heat was waning, and we thought we needed a second leg to the business. And we created a flexible generation business, admittedly using gas, but providing peak power when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and created these small gas engines in lots of the major edges of major towns and cities that could turn on when the grid was short of power. And that was a business that grew very well. It's now AMP Clean Energy today has the biomass business, has the flexible generation business, and was acquired, and we took it off the stock market in 2019 with the help of Asterion Industrial. I stayed on through the pandemic, which was a fairly challenging time. I'll come back to that later because I have some strong views on working from home. But I stayed on through the pandemic, and then I left AMP in 2021 to really wanting to get involved in more of a sort of slightly, I say plural career, but more investing and sharing businesses.
Yeah, and that period of AMP, I mean, you grew the business from, I guess, a very small number of people, basically a blank sheet of paper. And how big was the business, and what was kind of the size of the asset base by the time you'd left?
Well, we had, I think we had about 120 biomass plants, small biomass plants. We had nearly 50 flexible generation plants. Wow. We employed about 200 people. So it's, every business I've been involved in, we've grown it from one or two people to around, up to 200 odd people. And the beauty with Bring Energy was we didn't have to grow a business. We bought assets and operating people. But we had to build the business the other way around in terms of putting in services and all of the central services. So that was the attraction with Bring.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get a little bit more into that kind of people part of it in a second. But I think one of the things that you mentioned, which is really interesting, and not a lot of people had such a detailed level experience of that IPO process, of that listing and then delisting, and working with private equity. Could you talk to us a bit about, I guess, the differences in running an organization which has been IPO'd, which is in the public domain, in that way? Maybe some of the difference in governance, the things that you have to do, and the thinking behind how you lead a business in that situation compared to maybe a private organization.
Yes, it's a very, very good point, actually. So when IPOing a business, obviously you've got a very standard form of regulatory procedures that you have to go through with the listing particulars and the whole IPO process. You also have to identify non-executive directors who are going to effectively represent the business and obviously the shareholders. And being a chief executive in that situation, you are very driven by the reporting timetable and the obligations you have to let the market know on good and bad events that affect the company. So you are very driven from that point of view by a regular cycle of reporting, and then constantly being able to make sure that the market is updated on key issues and key events. So the quality of non-exec directors in those situations is very important, because you want people who are experienced at who've done it before, who've been involved in business, but also understand the vagaries of the stock market.
Mm.
Interesting, when you take a business private, you lose overnight all of the immediate obligations of having to report on in a public framework. So you can keep a lot of things private, but you have a different form of scrutiny in terms of the infrastructure or private equity investor who's wanting to tend to delve into a lot more detail in the way the business is run and the numbers. But you can have a much more open debate with your shareholders in the private arena than it can be more difficult when you're in the public arena. Again, non-executive directors are very important in the private sector. They tend to be linked to the the private equity investor who is there, but there's also independent ones. And I've seen the full remit. I've worked with quite a number of boards and there is a full remit of different non-execs that you can see. I've come across some very, very good ones, and who don't panic when there's a situation going on. And I've come across some really, really dreadful ones. And non-exec directors are very, very important to the health and well-being of growing a business. And as a CEO or as a leader of a business, they are an absolutely key part to it. But you've got to get it right.
Yeah, and one of the things that strikes me about that is, and as you talk through your career, the breadth of different people in different roles and no doubt different personalities that you will have had to deal with during your career, and to placate or to get alongside, or I'm sure sometimes to kind of push back on as well. I think with that comes a real ability to be able to navigate those complexities of personal interaction in leadership. How do you do that? How do you manage different stakeholders, different shareholders well? What's your approach? What's worked well for you in the past?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't get along with everybody. I'm not somebody who's everybody's friend. But my main judgment on people is, do they care, and do they really care about what the success of the business and people? And if I come across someone who really cares, then I can gel with them and can work with them.
Sure.
Because if someone cares, they're willing to admit mistakes, they're willing to sort out problems and help sort out issues. And to me, that is really, it may sound simple, but it's a really, really important thing. I also think that my initial first business partner on Ashura very sadly died, but he had a remit. You can if you think you can, and that is something that has lived with me since that moment. If you really believe in being able to do something, you can do it. So if you gather together bright, intelligent, well motivated people who care, who are not trying to outdo the other or point out unnecessary issues and can cut through the fog, I think you can really drive a business forward.
And I imagine that plays significantly into your philosophy behind how you have and how you do build executive teams to work with you.
Yes, I mean it has evolved over time. So I always used to say in the early years, the moment I get an HR director, I'm out of here. I now actually at Bring probably have the best HR director that I've ever worked with, and I find working with her is fantastic, and it's really helpful. So you'd learn from your experience. Similarly, when I was at Ashura, we used to outsource all of our legal work. So we had no in-house legal work at all. It was all outsourced to Adelshaw Goddard in Manchester. It worked well, but we paid through the nose for our legal advice. Having good legal people internally and using external law firms is a balance and is a learning that I've learned over time.
Sure.
Similarly, being able to have really, really good technology and IT side of things. And it's one of the advantages of Bring. We were able to not have to inherit too many legacy systems. We've been able to build new IT systems, and a lot of embracing the new technology is really, really important. So all of those types of thing is some of the learnings I've had in terms of building teams.
That's great. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, having sat on almost both sides of the fence in terms of started your career in banking, looking on financing assets, and then moving into kind of an operational role. I actually speak to quite a lot of people who have maybe been in that investor side role or in a banking side role who say, and I think the quote is, I want to be closer to the assets, and I want to have that ability to have that day-to-day impact. I guess a couple of things. Interesting to hear how your experience working on that kind of finance side has influenced your understanding of how to operate a business, and also whether it's a path that you would recommend people who wanted to do something similar. Like, is it a good thing to pursue?
I think one of my frustrations with financial investors is that they think everything can be done and answered via a spreadsheet. And there are some times that is fairly frustrating that actually managing and motivating people, particularly where a business, even if it's an infrastructure heavy business, still requires really good people to operate it and to run it. And managing and motivating people, growing teams with good succession planning is not something that you can very easily do via a spreadsheet. And I think getting that balance is really, really important if you're going to make the transition from being a financial investor to getting closer to the assets. It's understanding people. It's understanding, what gets people up in the morning.
Absolutely. So a couple more questions for you, then, Richard, before we close off. One of the things that strike me talking through your career is that you have made a lot of big decisions. I think you've probably fair to say you've taken a lot of decisions which people at the time might have said, oh, that's very risky. But you've done it, and obviously you've seen the benefits of that. I was curious to understand a bit more about your kind of approach to risk and reward. How do you decide whether an opportunity is the right thing? What's your kind of risk tolerance, and what has it been throughout your career?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting observation. The simplest way I would answer that is I have an 80-20 school of thinking in everything I do. I remember when I was talking to Swiss Life and Schroders about creating the team at the new team at Bring Energy, I said to them, I'll get it 80% right. I won't get it anywhere near 100% right. I'll get it 80% right, and then we'll sort out the 20%.
Sure.
Everything that I've ever done it's about having a go. And even if you get it 80% of the way there, you've had a go, and you can sort out the next 20. Where I get very frustrated is when people think that you need to get it 100% right from day one, because actually life doesn't work like that. So my big advice to anyone starting a business is have a go and adopt an 80-20 attitude.
Yeah, because you can see that almost analysis paralysis, can't you? People trying to get perfection and think, I can't take action until I know it's gonna play out exactly like this. Where it's just not real life, is it?
No, it's not. And to me, I mean, I've made just as many mistakes as I have, but it's actually learning. It's key is to learn from the mistakes, and then the next time, not make them again.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess a quick fire question: if you had to give somebody earlier on in the career who wanted to follow in a similar path to you, follow in your footsteps, a piece of advice that they can kind of cling on to that would serve them well, what would you say to them?
Work hard. Just put everything into it. Be prepared to do anything. Don't be too grand to dirty your hands. And the big thing is you make your own luck in this world. And having a go leads to things.
Yeah.
And just have a go, and it may lead to something else. And it's amazing what you can do if you put in a room yourself and other bright people. I'm a great believer that bright teams can achieve anything.
That's really helpful. And then you mentioned finally probable growth within Bring Energy. I'm sure growth within Ceras as well. An opportunity there. If there are people listening who think, oh, do you know, I'd like to be involved in the industry, or I'd like to learn a bit more, is there a way if we put in the show notes for people to get directly in contact with the team?
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking for really good people in both businesses, Ceras and Bring. And I think you can contact me through LinkedIn, or you can contact me through. The brightest people seem to be able to get my email, and I'll always respond. I'm not somebody who doesn't respond. So I don't want this to create 1,000 new emails. But I always believe there have been some people in my career who've written directly to me, who've ended up working to us because they've gone out of their way to research how to get hold of people, and I think that's what I would encourage young people, particularly people who are leaving school or university who want to make their way in the world. People like me have a obligation, I think, to help and create a career path for well motivated people who care, and that's my big advice to anyone.
Yeah, and that's a great takeaway to finish the episode on. So Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to the Real Assets, Real Leaders podcast. We look forward to hearing and speaking to you guys again.